The classical person is going to be more definite. Things are going to be clear-cut. They're going to say, well, this is right and this is wrong. There's very little room for gray areas. Or this is the truth. The classical person is going to look for sharp definitions of things, going to want to pin it down. For example, a classical definition of man is to say man is the rational animal, so that you can see man fits into this hierarchy of being. He's like the rung below him, which is the animal kingdom, but also he partakes of the higher realms. He has reason, can think, has sensitivity, and so on. Now, in the contemporary viewpoint, man is seen as not so fixed. Man is seen as growing and developing. It's hard to pin man down because man is in process of creating himself to be what he will be forever. So that man is seen very much in terms of freedom in this contemporary outlook, as one who's always choosing and trying to sort out various options and shaping his character, developing his personality through all the decisions that he makes.
Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio.
We're going to find that theology, or our understanding of the faith, is going to correspond to a large degree to this fundamental worldview. So people who are classically oriented are not going to want much change in the churches.
Joining Father Bacik in today's reflections are Program Director Mark Ferguson and Executive Producer Mary Beth Kirchner.
Evolution is the order of the day. As Teilhard says, that evolution is not just a biological theory of the origin of our species, but it is a whole way of looking at reality. It is a light in which we view all of life.
Today's Reflections focuses on the topic of contemporary theology and classical theology. Here's Father Bacik.
Well, we notice in the churches today a bewildering array of viewpoints and outlooks, people looking at their religions in different ways, people arguing about very fundamental kind of questions. It seems hard to get the average congregation to get along with one another now. We find this bewildering array of viewpoints and outlooks in the culture as a whole. And it seems that it is important for us to somehow put some order into that so we can make some sense out of it, understand a little bit of what is going on. And the most helpful distinction that I've ever come across for my own benefit is given to us by the theologian by the name of Bernard Lonergan, who distinguishes between a classical and a contemporary worldview. Now let's talk a little bit about this classical worldview to begin with. That arises from people's fundamental outlook on the world, in which they see the world as sort of a very ordered place, in which everything has its precise place. It fits into what we call the hierarchy of being. Mm-hmm. Things are positioned in the world according to the amount of being they have. For example, rocks would be at the very bottom of this plateau, and then this pyramid, so to speak, and then up above that we would have animals, and then human beings, above them angels, and up above at the top of this whole pyramid would be God, the supreme being. And in this worldview, which I'm calling a classical one following Lonergan, we see that truth is seen as timeless. If something was true a long time ago, it's true now. Truth doesn't have much to do with historical or cultural conditioning. Once something is true, it will be true always. It is, as we say, timeless. The world is viewed in this particular model as static. It has very little room for fundamental movement or process. Now, on the other hand, we have what we call a contemporary worldview. And this is in opposition to this classical outlook. In the contemporary worldview, evolution is the order of the day. things are seen as changing, as in flux. Everything is flowing. It's harder to pin things down. There's a lot more gray in this particular world. When we view the world in this way, we see that it is not so common to say, well, it was true once and for all, but to say that truth is historically and culturally conditioned, that it's dependent upon the situation in which it arises, that if we're going to determine the truth value of any particular statement, we have to know when it arose, what the circumstances were, what the particular language meant that it was used at that time.
Right.
So this contemporary worldview is very different. People in this view expect change. They sort of welcome it. They celebrate the fact that things are moving. It's more characteristic for these people to say, well, it seems this way to me, or as I view it from this perspective, I see this to be true. You notice they have a sort of relativized thing. The classical person is going to be more definite. Things are going to be clear-cut. They're going to say, well, this is right and this is wrong. There's very little room for gray areas. Or this is the truth. The classical person is going to look for sharp definitions of things, going to want to pin it down. For example, a classical definition of man is to say man is the rational animal, so that you can see man fits into this hierarchy of being. He's like the rung below him, which is the animal kingdom, but also he partakes of the higher realms. He has reason, can think, has sensitivity, and so on. Now, in the contemporary viewpoint, man is seen as not so fixed. Man is seen as growing and developing. It's hard to pin man down because man is in process of creating himself to be what he will be forever. So that man is seen very much in terms of freedom in this contemporary outlook, as one who's always choosing and trying to sort out various options and shaping his character, developing his personality through all the decisions that he makes. So, we have here a very sharp distinction between two worldviews. I hope that doesn't sound too abstract, but if you look at people around you, you can probably see that people function in this way. They just generally tend to deal with life in that way. So we meet people who are very clear-cut in their answers to things, very definite about their morality. They tend to think that maybe there's only one way of looking at the world, and whatever new ideas come, they want to filter it into that worldview that they have. Now, on the other hand, we know people who seem to like changing things. They like the fact that the world is in process. Evolution for them is the order of the day. I think of an example used by the great Jesuit paleontologist, theologian by the name of Teilhard de Chardin. He was very much interested in explaining the difference in outlooks or mindsets or viewpoints that existed in our modern world. And he likened it to people who were below decks on a ship. People who are down there are moving around. There's a certain amount of movement and interchange among the people. But then at some point in the voyage, some people leave that lower deck and walk up onto the top deck. And when they get up there, they look out and they said, my heavens, this whole thing is moving. I'm on a ship. It's in process. It's going someplace. I wonder where it's going. And Teilhard de Chardin says that's how it is with a lot of modern people, that they have come out from below decks up onto the top deck. And they begin to see that the world itself is in movement, that evolution is the order of the day. As Teilhard says, that evolution is not just a biological theory of the origin of our species, but it is a whole way of looking at reality. It is a light in which we view all of life, so that evolution becomes an outlook that people have. And I think this is what is happening in our modern world because of a lot of reasons, because of urbanization, because of the Industrial Revolution, because of the discoveries in the world, especially the scientific discovery of Darwin in the 19th century of evolution. So that his notions of evolution of the species became sort of a dominant way of viewing the world. So this evolutionary change has forced people to begin to think in different categories, much more in categories of process and change rather than fixed categories and essences and a static worldview.
Father Bacik, isn't Darwin's theory of evolution still quite a controversial issue? You're basing this whole idea of contemporary theology on the theory of evolution. There are a number of people, I'm afraid, who are still rather theoretically opposed to that.
Yes, I'm sure there are. It reminds me of the Scopes trial, for one. A lot of people have seen the movie Inherit the Wind.
Right.
Yes, right, in which this whole thing is portrayed that certain people rejected the evolutionary worldview, and I'm sure there are people around who do reject it, and even on scientific grounds, although my own understanding is that the scientific community, by and large, accepts that as a way of looking at reality and of the origin of our species. I suppose a lot of people have objected to evolutionary theory on religious grounds because it has run into problems with biblical interpretation. That's what was at the basis of the Scopes trial, wasn't it? That they said that evolutionary theory contradicted what it said in the Bible, because in the early books of the Bible you get a very fixed notion in which the world is created in 6 days and God rests on the seventh day, and there's very little room for evolution and change. So some people have felt that the evolutionary theory as a scientific theory contradicts what is held by the traditional religions, and therefore have opposed it on that ground. But I think that Teilhar's point is that apart from the scientific theory, evolution has become a way of approaching life. Even people who may never have heard of Darwin or have not studied evolution of the species kind of notions still tend to view life that way. They view reality as being in process. They expect change. Reminds me of Toffler's Future Shock, in which he says that change is the order of the day, and accelerating change will be the order of the day tomorrow, so that we can expect things to be moving always. And we begin to adopt that framework. We almost anticipate that kind of change. Now, therefore, this whole worldview begins to have great importance as we look at the world of theology then. I was trying to start out this whole thing by saying why we have differences in viewpoints in the church. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying is that we're going to find classical church members and contemporary church members. And therefore, we're going to find that theology, or our understanding of the faith, is going to correspond to a large degree to this fundamental worldview. So people who are classically oriented are not going to want much change in the churches. Classically oriented people didn't particularly like what happened in the Second Vatican Council for the Catholic community. For them, they want the religion taught to their children in a clear-cut fashion, just as it was taught to them in the past. So we end up with a dominant kind of theology. In fact, when they talk about God, God will be the unchanging one. God will be the supreme being, and there should be no talk of God changing in any way or being too involved in his world. And very often these people do not want to find particularly other images of God. This supreme being fits perfectly into their particular worldview. So and also in the realm of morality, we're going to find that people are going to want their Christian faith taught in very black and white terms. They're going to want the youngsters to memorize the Ten Commandments, for example, and to have a clear-cut morality given to them. So you see, not only is it a worldview, but it ends up being a whole theology, a whole way of looking at God, Christ, church, morality, and so on. On the other hand, the contemporary person is going to look for change in his church. Many contemporary Catholics, for example, would welcome the Second Vatican Council. They love it that there's variety in the liturgy. In fact, many of them want more. They expect the church to even adapt more to the modern world and to try to make the message more significant and up-to-date for people today. And these contemporary people now are going to be looking for alternate ways of looking at God. They're going to want God to be seen as someone who's involved in the process of life, who's very close and near, as we call it, a God of immanence, one who is not so far off or up above us, but close and near in the human struggle with us, fighting against evil, encouraging us to try to build the kingdom. And again, for people like that, they're going to look for the church to be seen in various ways. They don't want the church to be just one static grouping of people that's exactly the same as it was years ago. They will want that church to change as time goes on. In morality, very often these people will say, well, we have to make sure that Christianity is up to date with the times, that we have to understand that some of the rules that have been taught in the past are really relative and are subject to change. They want to make sure that people understand that some of the rules made by the church are culturally conditioned, and when times change, they may well have to be changed. Some of these people have a very easy and good feel about the changes we've seen so far in the Catholic community, for example. And the same thing goes across the board in any of the churches. I'm just highlighting the Catholic community because change became so prevalent for us as a result of the Second Vatican Council, but all of the churches are experiencing the same kind of thing.
Father Bacik, I've grown to feel very comfortable with this whole idea of contemporary theology. For me, it's been very helpful in focusing on the religion in my life and the changes in my personality. Yet there's a dilemma that I've come in contact with as far as the difference between classical and contemporary theology, and that people who tend to lean towards classical theology tend to set down their ideas as being right or wrong, and when it comes to religion, things are usually right or wrong. And once you try to change things or step beyond that, you no longer are a Catholic. And that's a dilemma that I face sometimes when sometimes I talk to my grandparents or parents of friends who can't accept the change. There really isn't a right or wrong, yet how do you deal with that type of problem?
Well, I think you've set the problem. I would put it in these terms, that very often those with a classical orientation are really not open to the existence of contemporary people within the church, precisely because of their outlook on things, that truth is timeless and fixed, and you either accept it or you don't. You're either in or out. That is their dominant way of looking at it. On the other hand, contemporary people are more at ease with pluralism, with the fact that there are a variety of views, and people are in stages of development, so that it seems easier for contemporary people to accept classically oriented ones into the Christian community, for example. Now, at one level, we could say what we have to try to do with these two groups is to ask them to get along. I mean, I think we have to plea for tolerance on the part of the classically oriented people, and to try to point out the goodwill of some of their contemporary friends, and to say, hey, look, these people are serious about their faith also. They are trying to live a good life. Because they explain things in a different way from you doesn't make them a bad person. Couldn't you accept them at the level of charity? We can still go to church services together. We can say the Lord's Prayer together, and so on. All of this seems to be something that we need to get. In other words, very often I'm talking to people who are sharply differing on this. I'm saying to them, look, you think differently, you view the world differently, you view the church and God differently, but you have to learn to get along. We have to learn to be charitable to one another. Now, I think that it is possible, really, to go beyond that. At least I hope it is. I think of an example of a young man at Bowling Green State University who told me that he was having a lot of trouble with his own mother on this kind of issue. And they were having trouble dialoguing at all, and they kept talking about the changes in the church and so on, and they disagreed and even got in arguments and so on. And one time he went home, and he decided to talk to his mother, not about their usual points of argumentation of differences in the church, but some of their primary reactions to life. Just like, well, Mom, who is God for you? Or how do you handle loneliness and anxiety in your life? What do you do with suffering? How do you handle death? In other words, what he tried to do is initiate a conversation on the fundamental issues of life. And in doing so, he found out that they didn't argue as much as they thought, or as they used to, and they had a lot much more agreement than they had anticipated. Now, what I think this points out to us is that there really is a common fund of human experiences that have a similarity about them. So all of us are born, all of us have to relate to our parents, all of us have to face suffering in life, all of us have to figure out what to do with our anxieties. we have to deal with death. So, and we could go on with that. We all wonder, we question, we fall in love, we relate to people, etc. Common human experiences. In other words, the great diversity that we perceive in our world is not the last word to be said on this whole question. There is a deeper basis of common experience which really binds us together, and we have to begin to be able to talk about those things. So that, you see, the young man succeeded in dialogue. Now, I think there's a lesson there to be learned in the churches in general, or in the society as a whole, as we try to deal with pluralism. That is, to return to some of our common experiences, to discuss those, to be able to articulate them well, describe our real feelings, and precisely give our thinking about these questions. And maybe we'll begin to see that we relate more than we used to think.
I'm having a problem right here. I'm remembering an image you brought up at the very beginning of this discussion, Father Bacik, about contemporary theology and classical theology. You said classical theology connotes or describes, say, a giant pyramid. Underneath are the rocks, and you move up to the order of life, and at the top is the supreme being, God.
Yes.
And I see this giant immovable mass of stones sitting there in the middle of the desert, unmoving. On the other hand, then, you said in contemporary theology, things are always moving, we're constantly changing, but I don't have in my mind an accurate mental picture. You give me an example. I see a pyramid, but I see something.
Yeah, I suppose that it is difficult to find a very concrete image, precisely because the whole business is in process. I think of that line from Hubert Humphrey, who said to the little boy, "Well, who are you?" He says, "Well, I don't know because I'm not finished yet." And I often use that line to point out that what characterizes the contemporary viewpoint is that we are not fixed at any point. We are always subject to change. So, especially when we think of human beings and our growth and development. So we think that you are shaping your personality by your decisions. You're making your character to be what it will be by all of the decisions you make in your life. So that what we get is a viewpoint, is an image of process, that the whole world is in process. That's the order of the day. And of course, it's harder to pin it down or to give a good image. Maybe there is one, but I keep going back to the human being who is open to reality, who is sort of drinks it in, who's ready to revise her opinion about things as a result of new data, who is open to other ideas, who is looking for new ways of expressing things. See, this is the image of a contemporary person that I would have in my mind. I suppose I do best when I think of concrete individuals who I know, who are like that, who aren't flustered by the fact that somebody brings up a new idea, or they like to take a course and study something new. They are just waiting for the day when the church will make other adaptations. They like to go to liturgies and see liturgical dance there, or they'll go out of their way to talk to people who have different viewpoints from themselves. So I keep getting back to human beings I know who live in this contemporary way. They're not flustered by the fact. They find somehow their security in trusting the process of life. Things are going on, and they think, well, that's okay. The changes might be for the good, they might not work out, but the overall process can be trusted. And I think that gets back to a faith perspective we would probably have to see the thing. And I don't think we can live comfortably as contemporary people unless really we see that this process I keep talking about can be trusted, that there is a God who's behind it. There's a God who's within the process, who's pushing it forward, guiding it, and there's a God, same God, at the end of the process who's the goal of it, and we will eventually reach that goal and fall into gracious hands.
Father Bacik, do you see this change from classical to contemporary theology as being a change within the church as a whole, as far as instruction that takes place now in grade schools and in high schools as compared to what happened maybe 5 or 10 years ago?
Yes, I think that it is reflected in all levels of the church, in the religious education, the way we deal with the liturgy, and with all the churches, they have to make provision for these at least two different viewpoints. And we got to remember what we've been talking about here are types. That is, orientations or directions. We're not going to find a pure classical person, and we're not going to find a pure contemporary person. They represent trends within people, or dominant emphases that we're going to find in individuals. And as types, they help us to begin to make sense out of this bewildering diversity that I began by describing. So I find it helpful for sorting things out in some ways, to try to understand this great pluralism that we have going. So what I've been trying to point out is that there's this classical type, rather static in outlook, and as well we have these contemporary people who are interested in change and process. Now, my great hope is that the two groups of people somehow can be brought together on the level of charity, but also at the level of dialogue, so that we can begin to talk with each other about our deeper experiences, and therefore maybe find a commonness that we didn't suspect was there.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio. Joining Father Bacik in this discussion were program director Mark Ferguson and executive producer Mary Beth Kirchner. The topic of this week's Reflections was classical theology and contemporary theology. If you have any comments about today's program or any ideas for topics you'd like to hear discussed, please write to Reflections in care of WLQR, Toledo, Ohio, 43623. Produced in the studios of WLQR.